Alrighty, hello everyone on this Wednesday, July 1st. Happy early 4th of July to those celebrating. This is the second episode of the Deep Water MMA Podcast. I'm your host, Northrup, and I'm joined by my co-host, Lucas Grandsire, and our special guest, MMA Fighting's own Mike Heck. What's up, guys?
You're the co-host, Lucas. You say hello
first. What's going on? We're so happy to be joined by Mike. Mike, how are you? Passing it over to you.
I'm doing great. How are you guys? Good to be here.
Good. For you guys, I did say 4th of July. Any fun plans coming up this weekend?
No fireworks for me, more than likely, since we're in the middle of a pandemic. But I don't know. We might venture out of the Berkshires for a little while, but don't really know. Probably more of the same. Just relaxing and hanging out with family. It's probably going to be our plans. But what about you guys? What's on tap for the long weekend for you guys for the holiday weekend?
Lucas, I should throw this out there, gentlemen. I'm not in the United States of America. I'm in France. So we get 10 extra days, and July 14th, we get to celebrate by, as French people for independence, we don't really give a shit. Look at the calendar and go, oh, okay, that's today. So it's not quite as exciting as, fireworks and just being an American.
So it's like you have two holidays, though. You still get to celebrate 4th of July because you have some patriotism behind you, and then you get to celebrate on the 14th as well. So you're a lucky guy.
We'll take it that way. My friends are like, what are you doing, man? You can't have a hot dog. You're not one of us. So, you know how people are. They're mean. It's like, I sound like you, damn it.
Have 2 hot dogs, Lucas. You deserve it, buddy.
Yes, America.
I think my 4th of July is going to be a lot like Mike's. Just to be able to go outside is that's a pretty big event nowadays. So I think maybe, we'll just roam around a little bit, little plans with the family stuff, possibly my girlfriend too. So looking forward to it.
Should be fun. I'm excited, Plus, I love fights and I love having fights every weekend, but I'm not going to lie. I'm not upset in any way that we're not having a UFC event on Saturday. Give us a weekend to breathe and then on to Fight Island.
Yeah, that was it felt like an Apex marathon almost. It's just like that every weekend. It was just and then I was like, what are they going to do once Contender Series starts too? Because then it's just going to be Saturday, Tuesday, Saturday.
I'm excited for Contender Series. I love it so much. It's my favorite events to cover are Contender Series. They're so good because I feel like I've interviewed a lot of these guys over the years, and to finally see them get this opportunity, it's just kind of cool to reminisce on the first time I interviewed them. Some of these guys were amateurs when I started interviewing them. Now they're, about to fight in front of Dana White and Mick Maynard and Sean Shelby for a chance to get a UFC contract. It's kind of surreal.
Yeah, it's cool. I'm collecting the interviews right now. It's kind of like a cheap prospect thing, because they're prospects, but not really. If you're fighting in front of Dana White, you're a little bit more than a prospect, but it's definitely cool getting to talk to them. And you make great content with those guys too.
For sure. And now you're going to, and you get some diamonds in the rough too. Look at a guy like O'Day Osborne last year. This guy did a ton of media heading into the fight and blew people away with the way he presented himself. And then he had the performance he had. And, unfortunately his UFC debut didn't go as planned, but still, he's still a guy on a lot of people's radars. We've seen what that show's done for guys like Sean O'Malley, even guys like Brock Weaver, got a lot of shine last year. And there's some other guys that we haven't even seen debut. I'm really excited to see Phil Rowe fight. When that happens, I'm not really sure, but I think he's got something in the works. So maybe we see him in August or September, but I'm excited, man. I'm glad we get this Contender Series. And a lot of people gave the UFC a lot of crap for trying to put these events on. And then I was one of those people that was just I don't know if I really like this idea, but what they've done over these last couple months, you just got to take your hat off to them.
Yeah. That was something we talked with James Lynch last week too. Just how we felt like a lot of these guys that were probably going to be on the Contender Series too were kind of getting pushed in because the pool to pull from was just so small during these, this Apex marathon going on.
Yeah, Brandon Royval was one of those guys. He had a fight lined up. It's hard to imagine that a guy like Justin James wasn't in a position like that. Max Roshkoff was probably going to be on the Contender Series, but we all know what happened with that situation. So I have a feeling there's going to be even more of those guys getting these opportunities, especially once these August cards roll around. They might just be preparing for a Contender Series fight, be in Vegas already, and be like, you know what? We're going to have you hold off for another 4 or 5 days. You're going to fight on this card on August 18th instead.
But listen, the crazy thing about these guys in the Contender Series, I talked to a few of them and I didn't realize it. A lot of these guys found out in March that they're competing and they've got like a 6-month-long wait. I couldn't imagine that, man. That would start to eat at me, like having to wait that long. It would honestly would leave a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth, just knowing all this time you're stressing about it in the back of your mind.
Yeah, it's funny how it's presented because they have this like list of guys that they know are going to be on it, and they notify them in March, early April. But Contender Series normally starts in June, so normally it's like 3 months, 2.5, and then these events start rolling, and then you see down the stretch that these events are running in, and all these fights are coming up, and they need to fill these spots. So you're seeing guys like Peter Barrett last year. I think he found it like a week and a half beforehand. Sean Woodson found it like 5 days before and cut like 35 pounds to get to 45, and then gets a huge upset knockout and makes it to the UFC. So that's what's the beautiful thing about the Contender Series, because these guys are all ready, and that call could come at any time, and they'll be ready for it.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And like one thing that's like interesting too is like we're talking about Contender Series and everything, but it just feels like a sense of normalcy now too, because like one championships, they said they're coming back. Like there's a Invicta card tomorrow night too. It's like, and Fight Island's like finally almost here. Like that was just like mystical thing that like you weren't even sure if that actually like was gonna happen or like existed. And now it's like we're weeks away.
Lucas is so excited he like vanished. Oh, there he is. He's back. He's back.
Yeah, my computer was like, nah, man, you're good. Let these guys talk. Mind your own business. Sorry.
He's laying out.
Yeah, sorry guys.
Oh, good.
But yeah, I mean, one of the reasons like why we're doing a podcast like of this format too is we want to have like other MMA journalists on and talk to them about like their past and things. And one of the reasons I wanted you on, Mike, too, is just like I felt like when you announced that you were joining MMA Fighting too, it was like right during when this pandemic this whole thing was starting. So what was it like to kind of like hear that news during a time like this?
Really weird. I feel like I feel like the timing was just perfect. Like if it happened a week later, I don't even know if it would have happened. You know what I mean? It was such a wild time. Like there's such uncertainty in the air that I didn't even think about the pandemic. Like I heard about it, and I think I was like everybody else at first, just like, well, it's probably not going to get to Massachusetts, so I'm not too worried about it. And then all of a sudden, boom, it's just like, I'm like, the UFC just had an event like 2 weeks ago and didn't affect anything really. So it was really crazy. So, and obviously I'm super thrilled that I got the opportunity, and they kind of threw me into the fire right away, which I liked, which is what I was hoping would happen. But it's just kind of weird thinking back. Like I have this conversation with my wife all the time. Like, I'm like, can you imagine if this happened like 2 weeks later? Like we may not even be here, which is like really weird. So it's the timing was just the right time. You know what I mean? It worked out perfectly. Everything just fell in at the right time. And sometimes life is like that. It's rare. It's rare that you're in the right place at the right time. It's kind of a cliche thing, but for me, that's what happened. And I'm super grateful for it.
And so let me ask you, the crazy thing is we did sort of the podcast together talking about your career. And the whole time I'm like, Mike's holding out on me. I know he's got something cooking. It's like, do you hope to do this full time? Oh, maybe we'll see. It's like, you knew damn well what you were doing. But what was that pitch like from MMA Fighting? Like, I don't know if they DM'd you, emailed you or whatever, but what's going through your head as you're reading this? And there's like this sense of, holy shit, I'm about to accomplish something that, I set out to do when I was covering MMA or, whatever it was.
I don't know if I've actually shared this story, but I had a job
exclusive.
So basically the whole conversation with MMA Fighting started in June of last year. So I was on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. We were planning on moving my whole family there. So I had moved down there by myself in January, and then my kid was still in school. So I would go and work full time. I would do interviews in between, and then I would drive home on the weekends, and then I would drive back to the Cape on Sundays. So as this is going on, I'm realizing that this job I took is probably not where I want to go. And I saw all this movement happening in the space. We're seeing guys go to ESPN. We're seeing The Athletic sort of form up and build their platform with that all-star cast that they assembled. So I just kind of, and you could probably ask Brian Tucker over there, and he'll tell you the same thing. I was kind of a pain in the ass. So I started emailing him, and I was just like, all right, here I am. Here's a resume I attached and all of this. And week went by, and I was like, you know what? I'm going to send him another email. So I sent him another email. And then like another week went by, and I was like, more moves are being made. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to send one more, and we'll see what happens. If he responds, great. If not, whatever. So I send an email, and like 2 minutes later, he gets back to me. He goes, "Can we set up a call for next week or whatever?" I think it was more or less to be like, just get off my ass. I'll just talk to you. And we got on the phone for like an hour, and we had like a really good conversation. I was at work, so I was driving around, supposedly doing like a sales call, but instead I was interviewing for another job. And we basically spoke like every month for a while. We were just like emailing back and forth. How's everything going? And then they needed to fill this other position because Luke Thomas ended up leaving, going to Showtime. So they had to fill this deputy editor spot. So basically I was put in this position like, we have to fill this role first and then kind of see where we're at. So I was like, okay, let's do that. So I made the decision at that point. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go full time and freelance and do all this other stuff. But this is all going on in the background. And then finally, probably like January-ish. So from June to January, I'm just like holding out hope that something's going to happen. And then finally in January, things started moving along and did some interviews. And what was funny was I do the interview. I thought it went really well. And the freelance opportunities started coming in. Like I was getting some like really good offers, like, okay, like we're moving good now. And I remember sending an email to Steven Morocco, and I was like, hey, I'm not trying to be pushy or anything like that. I'm like, if I'm not going to get this, just tell me now because I have these other things in the works. And he responded with an email saying like, oh, did you get the offer? And I was like, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I told you about these like other offers and, and then he called me, he goes, oh, I guess I broke some news to you. I was like, oh, Jesus Christ, thank God. So it's just like, it was such a long ride to get there. And I got to give all the credit to my wife because I kept telling her, I was like, I know I'm not bringing in a ton of money. I know you're kind of like doing the lion's share here. I would do some things on the side. Like I was DJing, I was hosting trivia nights and doing all this stuff, like trying to get money in the household however I could. But, once that call came, like I just called my wife right away and told her, I was like, yeah, some bad news. I was like, it looks like you got another full-time worker in the house. And she's like, what? Holy shit, this is unbelievable. But she was the rock of this whole thing. Like without her and her support and her belief, like this wouldn't have never happened. So, the woman behind I'm going to say the man behind the woman. She's the captain of the ship. But yeah, the whole story is crazy. If I wrote a book, that would be definitely a few chapters of it. No doubt about it.
Listen, let me jump in here, and then Connor, I know you have some stuff you want to ask Mike, but when you first joined, I was noticing at first they were only having you write up articles, and I was kind of worried. I was like, man, we know Mike for his interviews and all that stuff. How did What the Heck with Mike Heck come up? Like, is that something you pitched? Is that something they told you we prefer a show instead of individual interviews? Like, how did it happen where now you're hosting all this stuff, and it seems people are responding really well to it? Yeah,
so the plan that I kind of pitched was like, I want to do an interview show, and then I want to do like a panel show. That's how I wanted to do it. So when I first got on, it was just a matter of like, we can't just be like, oh yeah, hey, here's this guy, we're going to do a show. So they wanted to like sort of introduce me and like, let me kind of get in there and get my feet wet. And then I would do like a couple of interviews. I think like 4 or 5, I think it was like my 3rd or 4th day. I interviewed Chael Sonnen, like out of nowhere. Like someone just like randomly texted me. It was like, hey, Chael Sonnen is doing interviews. Do you want to interview him? I was like, hell yeah, let's do it. Chael freaking Sonnen. He goes, so you got to do it in like, can you be ready in like 10 minutes? I was like, for Chael, yes, I'll be ready in 10 minutes. So we did the video interview there. And like, we knew that the show was going to come together. And it was funny. We had like, I had the lineup for the first show, like ready to go with like Annek and Valerie Loretta and like a couple others. And we had no name for the show, nothing. Like, and it's funny when you're trying to find a name for a show, everything's taken. Like literally every idea is taken. So you'd be like, oh, this would be an awesome name for a show. And then you go and Google and you see there's like 18 podcasts with the same name. So after we had like the whole team on a Slack channel trying to figure out what the name is going to be. And we were starting to narrow it down. And then finally someone said, just go with What the Heck. It just makes the most sense. And I'm like, jeez. All right. I'm like, that works. I was like, people say that to me every single day of my life and have been for the last 30 plus years. So we'll go with What the Heck. And it just seemed to work. I brought my kid in. I was like having a conversation with him and he just goes, what the heck? So I added him into the open of the show. And, it's been really cool. It's been really cool just having these conversations. And, and I think the coolest thing for me was and Lucas, you could attest to this, and Connor, you as well, because you guys interview so many fighters at this point. There's fighters that you interview, and you're just like, holy shit, like this guy or this girl is like an incredible interview, and nobody knows it. Like nobody realized it. And I've been interviewing Kama Worthy forever, for like the last few years. And I every time I finish an interview with Kama Worthy, I'm like, oh my God, I'm like, this guy is just so good. Like, he's just such a good interview. Like I have so much fun with him. And when I interviewed him before his last fight, people finally like got to see it. They're like, oh my God, didn't realize Kama Worthy was, was so cool. Like I'm a fan for life. Like make sure you get him on every week. Like it was just one of those things. I think that's what been the most satisfying thing, because obviously I have a bigger platform now, but it's better for the fighters. Like some of these fighters that, you don't get to hear from that often, get that platform, and a lot of people get the opportunity to see it and hear it. And they're like, oh man, all right, now I like this guy. I like this girl. Like, I think that's been probably the most satisfying thing for me.
Yeah. I remember watching, I think it was one of the episodes of What the Heck too. You talked about kind of having like a radio background too. Like at what point did you kind of like take those talents to MMA? Like what kind of like spiked that interest?
So before I got into radio, this is like another kind of like right place, right time thing. I didn't go to school for like broadcasting or anything like that. Like when I grew up, I wanted to be a game show host. That was my whole thing. Like 6 years old, everyone wants to be firefighters and superheroes. I wore a bathrobe and a clip-on tie to breakfast every morning because I wanted to be a game show host. So I always so when I had the chance to like DJ weddings and stuff like that, like I always had like the gift of gab, and I always had like a projected voice, and a radio position like opened up out of the blue. I get a phone call from somebody I trained in like the DJ world, and they're like, hey, what do you think about being on the radio? I was like, cool. Like, of course, I'd love to be on the radio. And right before I started that, I started a podcast called the Sports Fan Like Conduct Podcast. It was just me and a couple of my friends, and we just talked about sports. We talked shit, and one of my friends was from Chicago, and I'd be like, the Bulls suck, the Cubs suck, the White Sox suck, they all suck, but the Red Sox and the Patriots are the best. So it spun off from there, and then the MMA thing, I started like getting into it, like with that podcast that I was hosting. Like I wanted to interview a UFC fighter. Like I just wanted to interview somebody. So I reached out to Joe Proctor on Twitter, who was on The Ultimate Fighter, and he was from the Boston area. And I didn't think he'd say yes. And he comes on, and we do like a 30-minute interview, and it was like amazing. I was like, holy shit. And then from there, I get someone DM me that like heard the interview and was like, hey, I work with all these like old UFC fighters, like Cal Warsham and Pat Smith and Manuel Yarbrough and all these other guys. Like, do you want to interview these guys? I was like, yeah, why not? Of course. Like I remember Cal Warsham almost got thrown out of the octagon by Tank Abbott. I'd love to ask him about that story. So we did that. And then like to coincide with that, there was an event in Syracuse called the MMA Classic Fan Expo. And I got invited out there. So I brought a couple of my friends and we went out there. And that's where I met Eric Cole for the first time. Literally interviewed him the next day. He probably thought I was like a crazy idiot. Why do you want to interview me? But just being able to talk to some of the fighters that were there, like Dan Severn was there, Brian Ebersole was there, and like some of the Butterbean was there. And there's like, I was doing interviews with like all of these guys. And then on top of that, like Carla Esparza was there, Felice Herrig was there, Ashley Evans Smith was there, Burt Watson was there. Like there's just so many different personalities. And once I started talking to them and like hearing their stories, I was just like blown away by the whole thing. So my co-host of the podcast at the time was with me on that trip, and we went out to lunch after, and I said, by the way, Sports Fan Like Conduct, as you knew it before, it's over. He goes, what are you talking about? I'm like, we're doing this. What we did this weekend, this is what we're doing from now on. Like, we're just going to interview fighters, get their stories. It's way more fascinating than us talking about, potential trades in Major League Baseball that 11 people are going to listen to. We're going to interview fighters, and that's what we're going to do. And he was like, no, we can't do that. It's a terrible idea. I'm like, trust me, this is what we're doing. You can either come along for the ride or you can hop off the train. I want you to come, but if you can't, this is what I'm going to do. And he stuck around, and that's what it was. Like the more I started talking to fighters, like the more I was just fascinated by their lives and their stories about how they got there. And it just kind of snowballed from there. It just became like one snowball and then turned into this big snowman years and years later. So it's been a ride, man. Like there are a couple of times where I was just like, I got promotions at my other job, and I was like, maybe I should just focus on this and, not just be done with MMA. Like I have this opportunity to grow my career in this industry. Maybe just this MMA thing's not for me. And then I remember James Lynch, had a conversation with him. I was like, I think I'm done, man. I was like, I'm in a good spot in my career. I think I'm just going to like go with that. And he was like, no, don't do it. Because even if you do one interview a week, like just put something out. I'm telling you, you're going to regret it. And I'm so glad I listened to that guy. Like, it's just crazy. It's just crazy. And I'm getting all reflective on you. But yeah, that's kind of where it started. And it just been from there, just conversing with fighters and building relationships with them. And I think like one of the coolest feelings that I've had covering the sport was the virtual media day this past week. Anytime I got it and asked a question, like just seeing the reactions to, and Lynch gets this all the time. And it was like, oh, next question, James Lynch for the score. Oh, James, what's up, buddy? Yeah, man. I was getting like Mickey Gall was excited that I got in there. Maurice Green was like, what's up, big dog? Like, that's just a cool feeling that like, you know, fighters remember who you are and like, and respect your work and your hustle. And, you know, it's just cool. It's just, there's so many stories and so many like good things about the sport and some grinding too, as you guys are learning as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because like I started covering like I had started back in like 2011, like right out of high school, and I was covering a lot of like local guys too. So it's cool seeing guys like Jared Gordon and like Aljamain Sterling, guys like that. I mean, even like George Sullivan too. I mean, he came in and went out of the UFC, but those are like the guys that like I just remember like at this thing. Like you don't even like they're good, but you just like to see that now. It's just like it is crazy.
That's how it was for me. Like with guys like Rob Font and Calvin Cater and. You know, seeing these guys come up through the ranks, like Charles Rose is another guy, and now it's just seeing them in the UFC and seeing them. And there's, I think the talent pool in New England now is the best it's ever been, like from start to finish. Like you got guys in the UFC, you get guys on the regional scene who are really close to getting that call, and there's some younger guys that are like 5-0 who you know are just going to be powerhouses in the UFC within the next 2 to 3 years. We're seeing guys like Randy Costa start to make a move and doing good things, and some of his teammates are right there, like guys like Mitch Raposo and things like that. Like they're right there, ready for that shot. We're seeing Peter Barrett now in the UFC. So the region is great. And that's why I tell people like, and I think I've probably told you this, Lucas, at some point when we've had our conversations, like just interview everybody, like literally anybody. It's like, if your local promotion is putting on a show in a week and they reach out to you saying, hey, you want to interview some of my guys? Say, yep, I'll interview all of them. Who you got? What times are they available? Let's do it. And then, you know, when they make it to the UFC or they make it to Bellator or on the Contender Series, who's the first person they're going to interview with when it's time? They're going to remember that you gave them a shot as they were coming through. So it's a huge lesson to learn. No doubt about it.
Yeah. And like earlier too, one of those guys you're talking about too was like Common Worthy and how you were talking for so long. I mean, obviously he had a big weekend this past weekend at UFC on ESPN 12. It just seemed like there was a lot of great performances on this past card too, a lot of finishes, but it kind of all got pushed aside after that main event.
Oh my God. What a fight that was. So ridiculous. That whole card was great. Like we were talking about some between the links. There's been 5 cards at the Apex before they're going to Fight Island. So my question to them, and maybe I'll just pose it to you while we're at it. What was the best event from start to finish? Because I know like when you have a pay-per-view mixed in, people are gonna be like, oh, the pay-per-view is obviously bigger because it's a pay-per-view. But was it the best card from start to finish? I think this past Saturday's one was probably the best.
I'm trying to think back right now.
The guest becomes the host.
Yeah.
I mean,
they didn't come to take part.
Even the June 13th card, which everyone crapped on heading into it, the one headlined by Jessica Ai and Cynthia Calvillo. That card was crazy too. They were all really good. Like all of them were really, really good.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think about back that one too. Like that Tyson Nam knockout, which was like crazy. And that was like one of the first. Well, actually, it was 3 straight knockouts in the first. Right? Wasn't it like 3 straight finishes in the first 3
all
fights?
All under a minute.
So,
Julia Avila, who I feel out of all the bonus snubs from all 5 cards, I thought Julia Avila got the shaft more than anybody.
Yeah, because she didn't even get a bonus that night, which was kind of insane.
She had the fastest finish of the whole night.
Yeah,
it was so violent. No bonus. Come on.
Yeah. And then just so getting on to, I guess, moving on to the debate portion of the show too. I already mentioned that Hooker Poirier fight, and one thing I just think is interesting when you think about this too is like what's kind of next for Hooker too, because it was a loss, but like it almost like to me, it just didn't feel like a loss just because of like how good a performance that was. You know, it takes two to tango. They obviously both put on a show, but just like what's next for Dan Hooker? And we'll start with Mike on this one.
Charles do Bronx Oliveira. That is the fight to make, because it's not like Dan Hooker got like steamrolled in the first round or anything like that. Like, it was a very competitive fight. All three judges gave him the first 2 rounds. And one thing that I've learned being part of MMA fighting is I do a matchmaker column on Mondays. And sometimes I'll throw out these ideas. And the biggest complaint that I get from people is, oh, come on, man. You can't book a guy coming off a win against somebody coming off a loss. Bull crap. Yes, you can. Because look what we just got. We got Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. Dan Hooker, 6-fight winning streak, or big winning streak against Dustin Poirier, who just lost. It just got finished by Khabib Nurmagomedov. We just got a fight like that. Tyron Woodley versus Gilbert Burns. Same thing. Gilbert Burns on this big streak. Tyron Woodley coming off a loss. Now we have a new contender, the top contender, and now he's about to fight for a title. So this whole myth that you can't book a guy coming off a loss against somebody coming off a string of victories is absolutely redonkulous. So I think Charles Oliveira, the streak he's on against Dan Hooker, even though he lost, his stock rose. Everyone believes he's a legit threat, upper echelon guy of a very loaded division. He's earned a seat at the table. The question is, has Charles Oliveira officially earned his seat? He beats a guy like Dan Hooker. He's earned his seat, in my opinion. I think that's the fight to make.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Mike, for sure. But after all this violence, I need more violence. I need it. I crave it. I want it. I want Hooker versus El Kukui himself. That's the fight. Like, I feel like, it's going to get better. I feel like that's the fight to make from a style perspective. Obviously, we know both guys, they come to bang. So it's going to be a great fight. I think it's a good test to figure out, a lot of people stopped believing in T Ferg after he lost to Gaethje. I feel like this is a great fight to sort of figure out where he's at. It's good for Hooker too, because he's one of those guys who you feel is always going to be sort of a fringe contender close to the title. This fight will also kind of help us determine. I mean, you lose to a Poirier, then you lose to a Ferguson, then it's kind of like, all right, well, maybe you're not necessarily a top 5 guy, or at least we figured out where your ceiling is. But from a fight perspective, I mean, I want all the violence, and that's why I'm going to have to go with T Ferg versus Hooker.
Yeah, I feel like I was playing around with like both those too. I was leaning more towards the Tony fight too, just because like of that excitement level too. It's like you just got this, so it's like you like you said, like you want more of it. Like, yeah, so like that's kind of like what I was thinking too. Is just like, oh man, like I would love to just see that again. And also too, I feel like Hooker would be in the same scenario too, where like if he does lose, like how far does his stock go down? Like if it is like a fight, like on paper, like what it looks like it could be.
If they booked Dan Hooker versus Tony Ferguson, am I going to complain? Absolutely not. I'm excited for that fight. However, the story is Dustin Poirier right now. Okay, he just fought for the title and got dominated. Like that fight was not even close. Like even with the guillotine choke, like it looked a little like nerve wracking for a moment, but you knew Khabib wasn't going to tap to a guillotine choke, even as deep as Dustin had it. So you can't put Dustin's the guy to fight for the title right now. But he can't fight Khabib. And the only thing that makes sense is if Justin Gaethje beats Khabib, which is a very tall task, he may be the guy that's just crazy enough to do it. If Justin Gaethje wins, you have a story there, Dustin Poirier versus Justin Gaethje for the title. But you have to also keep in mind that Khabib, even though he doesn't have like a dozen title defenses, the guy's undefeated. The guy's been a champion for a long time. If Justin Gaethje beats Khabib Nurmagomedov, 85% chance they're running that fight back. Like 85% chance. So what do you do with Dustin Poirier? Tony Ferguson versus Dustin Poirier is the fight to make. Of all these times that these guys have all fought, all the names that they've all competed against and shared the octagon with, these two guys have not fought each other yet. I am jacked to see what would happen with Tony Ferguson versus Justin Gaethje. And if Tony Ferguson wins, this is a guy who's on a massive winning streak. He took a short notice fight against a very dangerous guy when he was preparing for months to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. I think the UFC kind of owes him a solid here. I think they owe him a solid. So give him Dustin Poirier, winner of that fight, fights for the title. And even if Dustin beats Tony and Khabib's still the champion, I would still be down to see them fight again. Poirier versus Khabib. I think if you beat Hooker and then you beat Tony Ferguson, you get yourself a title shot no matter who's the champion.
Yeah. And you think about it too, like just those style matchups too. Like if Poirier did come out on both of those, like there's a good chance that like that's another, like crazy performance like the one we kind of saw.
For sure. I mean, and listen, like I said, you want to do Hooker versus Ferguson? I'm down for that. how excited would Tony Ferguson be for that fight when you have the Khabib fight taken away from you again? I don't think he's going to jump on that fight anytime soon, unless they say, like, listen, if you beat Dan Hooker, you're fighting for the title no matter what. Maybe he takes that because it's probably a more winnable fight for Tony. I'd say he'd probably be favored pretty heavily in that fight, especially with Hooker coming off the loss and being in a 5-round war like that. But I want to see Ferguson versus Poirier. And then, Oliveira versus Hooker is a damn good fight. It's a damn good fight.
Listen, you guys are forgetting these two names, two little wild cards out here for Poirier. You want the UFC to do him a solid. You want a real solid, give him the real fight. You know who the money fight is? You got Nate Diaz, who could, that fight was supposed to happen. That could be something wild card if you win it. It doesn't necessarily derail you from, potentially the title. And, of course, the rematch against the notorious Conor McGregor. I mean, I feel like we want to see it, damn it. We saw a
You're muted.
Yeah, I think you cut out there.
Man, it cut everything right there. I mean, I don't even want to finish except that I want to see Poirier versus McGregor and maybe throw in Diaz too.
Until Nate Diaz steps back in the octagon, I just don't believe he's going to fight again. I don't think he has any desire to get back there and fight. People have told me otherwise. I just don't buy it. Conor, I would love to see that fight. In fact, I think that's the fight that actually makes the most sense from a rankings perspective and like a storyline perspective. But you've seen Conor. Conor reacts over the years when he beats a guy and beats him definitively. He doesn't feel like there's a challenge there at all. Like that's why the Max Holloway fight never materialized. That's why the Jose Aldo rematch never materialized. And that's probably the same reason why the Dustin Poirier fight will never materialize. Now, if Dustin Poirier fights a Tony Ferguson, wins, and then somehow becomes a world champion, guess who's going to be knocking on his door? It'll be Conor McGregor. But again, Conor doesn't seem like he wants to fight right now. And Conor's probably not going to fight until there's a live gate somewhere in this world, which probably won't be until 2021 at this point.
But does Fight Island not make you want to come back, gate or no gate, like the fighting in hot-ass Abu Dhabi? That doesn't make you want to come back? I mean, even if it's for inferior money, it's Fight Island, Mike. At 6
a.m. local time? I don't think
early bird gets the worm.
I don't think Conor's not your typical early bird, and unless that worm's made of 24 karat gold, I don't think he's going after it.
Right. Shitting on my dreams, but
I'm sorry, man. I want to see it. I'd love to. I think that's like the most logical fight to make. It's just when you're dealing with Conor, it's just so many roadblocks.
Yeah. And we talked about this Poirier Hooker fight too, but just for you guys, what would you say was probably the best performance, most memorable performance besides that fight this past weekend? And we'll start with you, Mike.
Oh, I get to go first on this one?
Yeah.
Shoot. I'm going with Julian Erosa, man. I think his story to get back to the UFC, to get this opportunity, and I interviewed Julian Erosa yesterday, which you'll be able to see tomorrow morning. Julian was not the first choice to take that fight on short notice. He was like the second or maybe the third choice. He thought he was probably like a top 3 guy. If there's a list of 3 guys, Erosa was probably the third on the list. They had a guy lined up. Erosa was told, no, you're not going to get this one. Stay ready, maybe next time. And then finds out a day later that, you know what? I don't think these guys are going to be ready. You're in. And then to go in there and fight a guy like Sean Woodson, who was having a hard time finding a fight for numerous reasons. One, because he's, as Julian called him, he's like a big jacked alien guy who just is so long. He's 6'3", fighting at 145. The guy couldn't get a fight. Julian Erosa steps in on 5 days' notice, 1-4 in the UFC. He's been released 3 times. 3 times from the UFC in different ways. His last 2 fights in the UFC, he was released in back-to-back fights. Back-to-back fights. Loses to Grant Dawson, gets released. Julio Arce needs an opponent. We'll bring him back. Then he gets released again after he gets knocked up by Julio Arce. And he actually looked pretty good in that fight for the first 2 rounds. Gets a win on the regional scene, comes back. Probably lost both rounds to Sean Woodson, but just kept coming forward. And at the end of the second round, you could see the momentum starting to shift. He gets dropped in the 3rd round and then comes back and submits and puts away an undefeated fighter, one of the top prospects in the division. To me, it's got to be Julian Erosa. I think that guy rightfully deserved a bonus. And it's crazy. If Poirier versus Hooker didn't happen, that fight probably would have got fight of the night too.
Yeah. No, that's crazy too, because like you even think about that fight too, and it's like not like put all the other stuff like aside of like as far as like his history with the UFC and like the 5-0 and everything. It was like the way he won that fight too. Like he just like Woodson was fighting how Woodson fights, but he just like he kept coming. You're like I just kept like saying, I was like, how is he doing this? Like he just kept like going, especially on like such short notice like that too. I mean, it was like really impressive.
So wild. Such a cool story. I'm very happy for that guy. That's another guy I've been interviewing for a long time in the UFC, out of the UFC, coming off of wins, coming off of losses. And just to see him finally go out there and get the shine that he's wanted for so long, it's just a really cool moment. And I thought, to me, that was the story. I mean, there were some great performances. Like Mike Perry is obviously the biggest story to come out of that event, even bigger than the main event. Everyone's talking about Mike Perry heading in and the girlfriend. And then coming out, it was just Mike Perry versus the tax man. Like Mike Perry finds a way to be the front page news. And he was still, even after a fight of the year contender in Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. So Perry's the biggest story, but if we're talking about like overall performances, to me, it's Rosa.
Yeah. Well, that's funny too, because like I feel like a lot of my friends who don't even watch MMA, like they all knew about Mike Perry. They're all messaging me like, who is this crazy guy? Like,
oh, I love that guy. I mean, he's one of the most underrated like promos in the game. Like love him or hate him, you want to hear what Mike Perry says, and math doesn't lie. You look at anybody's YouTube page that like filmed the virtual media day and put it on their websites. Mike Perry's destroyed everybody else's. It's not even close.
Listen, for my moment of the night, it's got to be someone that terrifies me before every time I interview him, who isn't afraid to yell at me and tell me after an interview, as I talked about with James Lynch on Twitter. But it's got to be Tanner Boser, of course. He is a terrifying interview. I don't know if you guys have talked to him, but I was not ready that first time, and I got exposed, man. Came back stronger the second time. But listen, speaking of his fight, he tells me, I'm like, how do you see his fight playing out? It goes to a decision. All right, Tanner, that's very Tanner, but it's also very boring. Goes out there and sparks Felipe Lins, who is the PFL champion. I mean, even like talk a little bit about fighter pay. Like you just saw the numbers, and it was like, damn, that's so disappointing. But the KO was awesome. Herb Dean pulling out some judo or whatever kind of role it was to somehow get that big man off of him was quite incredible in its own, and deserves a bonus just for that. But yeah, I thought that was pretty great, and it surprised me because he's talking about getting a decision and gets the knockout. So it's like, usually it's the other way around. I'm going to knock him out and we get a boring split decision. But, good on Tanner. I thought it was a good performance. And I think, like, he got his name out there, really. Everybody was kind of like, oh, skinny Roy Nelson. He's very Canadian, missing a tooth and everything. The post-fight media got to find out real quick, not talk about 205. So I thought he obviously didn't steal the show, but he did a great job out there getting a good finish and getting his name out there and potentially having a cult following himself.
He had a name ready to go, and now the matchmaking's already done. Him versus Maurice Green later on this year. I'm in.
Yeah, love it.
I'll tell you who I think is also like my under the radar star of the night, John Annek. Annek was tremendous on Saturday with the calls. I mean, he's always great on the broadcast, but just the way he laid out for Maurice Green and laid out for Mike Perry and laid out for Tanner Bozier and like let these guys, Kama Worthy, just letting these guys like tell their stories and get whatever they had to off their chest. Like there's a lot of times that I think we've all been in this position before where you hear a lull in the action, you just want to jump in and fill space. Like we can't have any dead air, but Annek just laid out and let these guys like get their emotions across. I thought honestly, and I actually spoke with John today. I told him this. I thought this was going to be a night in terms of broadcasts that we're going to be talking about for a while. I think John Annek was top notch. I think I'm not going to say it was like his best card ever because I have to go back and watch them all, but in terms of like how I felt about a broadcaster and how they presented himself throughout an entire card, I thought Annek was an A++ on Saturday night.
That mustache too is added on his face.
Between Annek's mustache and Holloway's hair, those are the two most trending things on Twitter on Saturday night.
But with John Annek, I'm never going to forget that awful unhinged promo in the middle of the fights. How distracting was it? Do you ever feel? Waits 5 minutes. Unhinged. It was so distracting. I was like, what? And I know it's not his fault, but who told you to take such a dramatic pause and ask me if I feel unhinged? Like, it just, I loved it. I loved every minute of it, but that's peak MMA. That and the balls trimmer in the middle of the octagon. I mean, you got to love it.
Absolutely. There's just so many great, and that just shows you, like, I feel like we have so much to talk about after all of these cards because there's so many performances just come out of nowhere and just, I mean, look at a guy like Justin James, just been waiting for that UFC call, comes in on short notice and just blasts out a tough guy in Frank Camacho. And now he's starting to get some shine. He's starting to get some interviews, and that's another guy that has a great personality that nobody even knew about. So, that's the beauty of these cards. It's the beauty of being the only sport around right now. I was telling Annek this earlier. I have 3 brothers. None of them are big MMA fans, but they were watching all of those cards. Every single one of them. They're all texting me, "Oh, did you watch that fight? Oh, this guy's going to kill this guy, isn't he?" Like, never get those texts from my brothers.
Right.
It's nuts.
Yeah. That was like a lot of my friends were MMA, but they're degenerate gamblers. So a lot of them were gambling on all the fights too, because it's like there was nothing else. It was that or Bundesliga soccer. So
that's usually what my little brother would text me about, because he's one of those gambling guys. Yeah. Who would you bet on this fight? I'm like, well, I wouldn't bet on any of them, but I'll throw him like if there's like an underdog play that like I feel is lined ridiculously, I'll be like, if you want to take a shot on somebody, maybe take a shot on this person, because I feel like the lines are like atrociously off in this one. Like, I thought Worthy versus Luis Pena should have been lined way closer.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's just going off of what you said too, because I was going to pick a Rosa too. Just I talked to him yesterday too, and just like that, like his whole story, he had a crazy story going into it. But like as soon as you said that, like in my head, I was like, I mean, there's like so many other guys like to pick too, just from like this weekend too. Like I mean, Kay Hansen too, I thought was like really impressive, 20 years old. I mean, and like we already talked about, but like Worthy too. I mean, he submitted Luis Pena, who's just coming off a win too. So like, I mean, yeah, like you said, like they're really like. I don't think there really is like a bad choice. Like,
there really isn't. That's like, and the bonuses are going to be tough to pick. Like, obviously, you knew Poirier and Hooker was going to be the fight of the night after that one, but the performance bonuses, I thought Tanner Bozier should have got one. I'm sorry, I thought he deserved it. No offense to Kay Hansen. Kay Hansen had a great win. Jinyu Fry is no joke, but Tanner Bozier's finish was better than hers. Just throwing that out there. No offense to her. I'm glad she got the bonus. Extra 50 G's in her pocket for a 20-year-old. That's great. She got the Ronda Rousey shine. I'm sure that didn't hurt with the bonus process. But Tanner Bozier's knockout against a guy, a former world champion, Philippe Lins, was a little bit it was a little bit better in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Coming back to that fight with Kay Hansen real quick. If this would have happened in Invicta, which there was no way it was happening because of the way the division was lined up, but she would be the atomweight champion in Invicta. Like, that's just crazy how that happened. I thought the matchmaking was weird. And then the fact that she won, I mean, good story all around. And it looks like her Twitter's blowing up and everything. And I found out she was following me on Twitter. So shout out to her. That's always cool. And good stories all around.
Jinyu Fry is so much talent. Like, she really does. Like, her striking is so good. There's just something in her game that like holds her back. I just don't get it. Like, the first round, you got to see a little bit, like the body shots she was landing in that first round were nasty. They're so loud and ferocious. And then like second round comes and she just stops throwing. Like, I don't know what it is. I don't know if she needs a new team. I mean, I know her husband's like part of her corner, but there's gotta be some sort of switch in her that like turns the aggression up. And they even showed it like on the broadcast, like, she is one of the nastiest knockouts you will ever see in women's MMA. But for some reason, just lately, she just doesn't pull the trigger. She's not aggressive enough. And she's going to be really good. She could be, even at 115, she could be really, really good. She's just got to get that output up a lot more and just throw that power and just be ferocious all the time. And she'd do really well. And Kay Hansen took advantage of the lulls in the fight and got the fight to the ground and stole the momentum and then stole the fight and stole $50,000 in the meantime. So good for her.
Honestly, I think it's a mental thing with her, just from the few times where I interviewed her, where she, you kind of expect her to speak a certain way. And then when you actually talk to her, she's different. I feel like she's not totally in tune with the fight. Like she got knocked out in, I think it was Korea, maybe for Road FC or something like that. I forgot what it was, a little while ago. And she's saying she's getting distracted from the commentators. But your fighters talk about, what do you hear? I hear my corner and I hear my heartbeat, and maybe I hear my opponent's breathing. So if you're hearing the commentators, you might not be in the zone. Who was it? Mina Grusander, she was saying like, oh, she smelled horrible. Like, there are things like that where you're like, are you mentally all the way there in the fight, or are you letting things distract you? And obviously I'm not an expert, but I would think that mentally something is a little bit missing from her game.
Maybe it's just, maybe it's just the mental coach side of it. Like, a lot of fighters have found a mental coach, like, and you've seen a lot of success. Like, some on the same team, like Alex Perez, one of those guys, found a mental coach. He hasn't lost a fight since. Christian Aguilera got a gift for his wedding from Alex Perez to work with the same mind coach. He hasn't lost a fight since. Got his UFC debut and Starch, a really talented guy. at 170 and Anthony Ivy. So, people frown upon that for some reason. They think it's like it makes you look bad. It downgrades you a little bit, but sometimes it's just what you need to kind of put you in the right place. Because when you're visualizing everything before it happens, it makes the actual fight much easier.
Yeah. And then our last topic to get to today, our last debate topic, Mike, you mentioned in the show how it was one of the most talked about things, but Mike Perry won with his girlfriend in his corner. We saw Diego Sanchez. He had like one of his coaches, fight against Michael Chiesa. But, guys like Gilbert Burns, I saw on Twitter too. Like he was saying like, oh, thanks a lot, Mike Perry. Like now my wife like wants to corner me for my next fight. Like, is this something that not even just maybe like having your girlfriend, anything like that, but like, is this something we could see more of? And, is that a good or bad thing?
I don't think it's ever a bad thing. Like fighters, if they're comfortable, if Mike Perry's comfortable having his girlfriend in his corner, just icing him down, all the power to him. Like that's you have to be comfortable with who's around you to compete at your best. So if it's with 3 top-notch all-star coaches, or if it's with your girlfriend or your little brother or your little sister, like whatever makes you comfortable, do it. Now, do I think we're going to see wives and girlfriends cornering a lot of these fighters down the road? I doubt it. But, could we see times where maybe one coach comes out? Or I think we might see that more, especially in a time like this. Luis Pena didn't have his head coach for his fight with Kama Worthy, and, that was a difference maker. So maybe it's 1, maybe it's 2, but I think what Mike Perry did was he made it not uncool to have just one person in your corner. People gave him so much crap for that, but Mike Perry, even like after the fight, it made sense. Like heading into the fight, it just didn't make sense. And then the way Mike sort of explained it to the media afterwards, like listen, like I listen. There's one specific line that he said. It was like, coaches learn more from me when I fight than I learn from them when I fight. And I thought that made all the sense in the world. So why is Mike Perry going to pay all these guys when he's not even going to listen to them anyway? He's basically admitted, like, I'm not going to listen to anything you say. I'm just going to go out and do whatever I feel is the right thing to do. And I think more fighters are going to fall into that direction, into that lane. But if the question is, do we expect to see, girlfriends in corners and wives in corners? Maybe sparingly, but probably not in the same way that Mike Perry did it.
Yeah. I mean, it made for like great TV too. Because I mean, before this fight, all I kept saying was, I was like, I just want it to go past the first round so we can like just see it firsthand.
Yeah, it was cool. And then they cut to commercial between the first and second round. I was like, what are you doing? This is what we've been waiting for all night. Crazy.
Yeah, but listen, I mean, the thing though, I think people are missing is this was, and I know using these words with Mike Perry in the same sentence is a little bit weird, but this was a calculated risk. If you're going to try something like this, it's against a guy like Mickey Gall who doesn't have the experience you have and whose biggest win is Sage Northcutt and CM Punk of all people. So for me, this is the perfect situation for him. And I think back to that video where, he's talking about his coaches and he's like, feint. And they keep, Mike, do it. And he's like turning around like, shut the fuck up. Like, this isn't the first time he's had issues with his corners. And it sounds like, I guess he wanted to go out there and try a fight with no one telling him what to do. Like, when Anthony Smith fought Glover Teixeira, I mean, his corner was telling him literally everything, breathe now, take a step to the left, go ahead and feint. It was too much. And I feel like Mike is one of those guys where he needs to be able to think, even though people look at Mike and they're like, he doesn't really do that, but he needs to think, needs to be in the zone and doesn't need a guy bossing him around like that. And if you're going to try it, it's during the pandemic with no crowd and against a guy like Mickey Gall. I mean, you can't go out there against Jeff Neal and try that because you're going to get mollywopped. But this was the right opportunity to potentially try something like that, as crazy and as Mike Perry as it seems.
Yeah. And like, even just watching like that post-fight press conference too, just like, even him, it almost seems like he's like not planning on doing that again. I mean, maybe she will be in this corner again, but he was already talking about like he wants to work with like Yoel Romero. It seemed like he wants to find a team.
Yeah, and I think people underestimated who Mike knows and Mike's willingness to find teams. It's not like he was in his garage the whole time preparing for the fight. Right. He said he was in Lubbock, Texas a lot. He got a lot of working with different teams, a lot of UFC fighters. But he went in there with the mindset and talked to the coach and said, listen, I'll give your guys some work. They can give me some work. And I was like, but if you're going to tell me what to do, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm just going to do what I do. But I'm coming to get work in with your guys and your guys can get work with me. And Mike was in great shape. Like he was ripped. Yeah. He looked jacked. Like he looked phenomenal. Like he really did. And I was super surprised at how the fight played out, honestly. Like Mike played us. Like I said, that I feel like he played us all. The way he approached the fight, the girlfriend stuff. I mean, I feel like he played us not just because of the girlfriend stuff, but posting the bloody fist photos and all the other stuff he was saying. Mickey's a weak opponent and just coming out and saying all this stuff about the media and the fans and all this stuff. Like I feel, and then you got the real guy, like after the fight, like talking about his taxes and being honest and being real and speaking so clearly and eloquently. We're like, okay, yeah, we're just like, Mike said some things that are going to stick with him forever. But I feel like we got to see sort of the real guy on Saturday night. And, he spoke with Ariel yesterday, and I feel like he got a lot more of that as well. Another, very calculated interview, called out Nate Diaz, which honestly, I'm okay with that. Sign me up for Mike Perry versus Nate Diaz. But I mean, Mike's just become a guy that like, you just want to see what he says. Like if he loses, he wins. Like you just want to hear what he says. Mike's just that guy. And I feel like his stock rose tremendously on Saturday night, even beating a guy like Mickey Gall, who I thought, by the way, Mickey looked pretty good in that fight. Like there was some things you could tell he's just behind. Like he needs to get stronger because Mike Perry just threw him around whenever he could. But Mickey looked pretty good on the feet. He did. He was sticking and moving. He had a great game plan, but eventually Mike just grabbed a hold of him and just kind of threw him around a little bit. And it was just weird. Like, I think everybody posted on Twitter at one point, like, if you told me that Mickey Gall is going to outstrike Mike Perry and Mike Perry is going to outgrapple Mickey Gall, I'll tell you were crazy. And that's how the fight played out. But Mike Perry's strength and tenacity, and I think the biggest factor was his experience led to such a big win for him.
I think a whole nother aspect too is Mike said himself too, like he could hear the corner of Gall too, because like he wasn't really listening to anyone like on his side, that he was able to focus on that. So he said he kind of started figuring out like the code names and certain like that, so he kind of knew what was coming.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the empty arena. I just love it. Like, and I know the fans like bring a certain ambiance to everything, and when there's a great fight and you hear the crowd in the background, like it's cool. Like, it enhances the energy a little bit. But personally speaking, the fans can stay home. I wish, like, seriously, like if they did empty arena fights for the next 2 years, I'd be totally okay with that.
Yeah. Well, like Cynthia Calvillo too, she did like something similar too, because I remember she was saying too that she could hear a lot of Jessica I's cornerman too.
Yeah, because most of them were part of like the Dwayne Ludwig system. Like they learned their striking through there, and Cynthia Calvillo worked with Dwayne Ludwig for years at Team Alpha Male, so she knew like the code words like right away. She knew exactly what was coming at all times, and that was a huge advantage for her, being able to hear that and hear those commands. She knew exactly what was coming, and she even said like when I interviewed her after that, she just to bust Jessica's balls and her coach's balls, she would throw the combination that they called for Jessica right back at her. Like it was great. It's crazy.
Yeah, but speaking of code word, like how terrible, like he was like, oh, I heard him shouting razor. The second I heard razor, I was like, that's got to be elbow, right? And he went for an elbow. I was like, okay, I mean, you could have been a little bit more creative than that, right? But I mean, at the same time, like you guys know what you're doing, but it's like, razor for me, like what else could it be other than an elbow? Like that makes too much sense.
You need like Peyton Manning commands, like right. Omaha. Like I watched Peyton Manning quarterback for over a decade. I still don't know what Omaha means. And he said it 10 million times. Like, you got to be a little more creative with the code words. Yes, razor. Clearly, we're looking at an elbow situation, right?
Come on.
Well, I know me and Lucas want to talk about a few other things. Mike, I know you're a busy man, but you're more than welcome to stay if you like.
Sure.
All right. Moving on.
Let's go.
2 for 2 on staying so far on the podcast.
Yeah, so I know. We're doing well here. We're undefeated. But I mean, obviously we have Invicta tomorrow. I know, Lucas, that I think you talked to like 3 or 4 of the girls in the card tomorrow. What are you guys kind of looking forward to on that card?
Well, real quick, just if I can add something, I got a message from our good boss, Eric Kowal, who tells me good thing we got the Diana interview out yesterday. Did Diana Bennett pull out of her fight? Did I miss something while I've been, focusing 100% on the podcast?
She is out. The fight is canceled. She had a problem with her weight cut, and Invicta is going to go forward with 5 fights tomorrow night.
Boom. Mike coming in clutch.
Oh, in addition, Victoria Leonardo is getting her show money.
Okay.
Good on her. So there's your update.
There we go. That's why we wanted you to stay, Mike. Like you're just so fun.
I'm just happy
any other updates?
I'm just happy there's a card. Like
Yeah.
Invicta always puts on great shows, and now they got another one booked for July 30th, which is going to be a really good one. I love the co-main event of that card with Stephanie Gelmarker versus Erin Blanchfield. Holy shit, what a fight that's going to be. So Invicta's back. 5 fights. Should be a nice quick night at the office watching some violent women's fights tomorrow night in good old Kansas City. Empty arena. I'm excited.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously we have Fight Island. I mean, it's almost here. And I mean, you look at this 251 card, obviously, you know, that's big, but I kind of want to look past that and just like for you guys, what would you say are like your top 3, maybe like storylines that you're looking forward to for these upcoming cards?
You said not including 251?
Yeah, I just feel like that's like one that like almost like everyone's looking at too. So like I almost want to like look a little past that too, just because it does have the 3 title fights. It could be Paige Van Zandt's last fight too. I just feel like there's so much on that one too. Like what else does Fight Island have to offer?
All right. Well, I'm gonna cheat a little bit.
Yeah, I have to. Yeah, me too.
251. Yuri Prohashka's debut against Volkan Ozdemir. That is a huge story. I know we're not talking 251, but we've got off the main card. All right, we're talking featured prelim.
All right.
So I think that's one. Darren Till versus Robert Whitaker. I mean, good Lord, what a great fight that is. Yeah. And then Danny Ige versus Calvin Kattar. I mean, that's an under the radar main event. It's hard to say that a main event is an under the radar fight. You know, Calvin Kattar's taken a big risk fighting a guy like Danny Ige. I mean, Danny Ige's surgeon, way below him in the rankings. I think he's 4 or 5 spots below him. But Calvin Kattar's just like, you know what? Dan called me out. I'm going to make him pay for it. And you got to respect that. And I'm going to throw one more in there because I think this is the most under the radar fight on Fight Island of the entirety of the 4 cards. Davison Figueredo versus Joseph Benavidez. No one is talking about that fight. Nobody. Yeah. It's a title fight. Nobody's talking about it. They're talking about the co-main event of that card more than the main event. They're talking Kelvin Gastelum versus Jack Hermanson more than they're talking about Joseph Benavidez versus Davison Figueredo. Like, it's crazy. So there's a lot to be excited about. Plus Montel Jackson versus Brett Johns. I think that's the show stealer, one of the show stealing fights of Fight Island.
Let me throw another fight out there that I, remember that was happening without looking at my phone was Abdul Razak Al Hassan making his big return. I know, he's had some legal issues and things like that. I was kind of curious to see if we're going to see him back in the UFC, but ignoring all that stuff for a little bit, focusing purely on fighting. I mean, he's starching these guys. I mean, he's putting on some exciting fights. So I'm curious to see how his return looks. I mean, he's taking on Munir Lazez. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly, but we're going to see how that goes. I think that's kind of an interesting one that's flown under the radar, but I assume he's not going to be too popular with the fans considering, his situation over these past 2 years.
Yeah, I mean, he was cleared. So, I mean, that's just something you're going to have to deal with, unfortunately. I mean, there's a lot of fighters that have troubled past, and some are able to get through them, and some are just going to be tied to it for the rest of their careers. And, if Abdul believes he can go in there and fight and deal with this, like, look at Greg Hardy, for God's sakes. I mean, there's never going to be, a Greg Hardy contingency group that's just going to be full on support. They're not going to be greeting him at the airport with flowers and candy. It's going to be the same thing for every fight of his career. So, and Abdul may be dealing with some of the same things, but luckily, if there's any silver lining for him, he doesn't have a name quite like Greg. Like, he didn't play in the NFL. It wasn't a Pro Bowl or anything like that. Not saying that it doesn't make his crime just heinous, but still, at the end of the day, he was cleared, and it is what it is.
I have 3 things I'm looking at for. One of the things is Frankie Edgar's 135 debut. I'm just interested in that. I mean, this is a guy we saw fight, the champion. He was the champion at 155, and now we've seen 2 weight classes lower. I'm interested to see how he does. I think Pedro Munoz, I mean, that's a tough new weight class like debut there. And then I'm just excited to see Alexander Gustafsson come back too, especially at heavyweight. Like, I'm just like July 25th against Fabricio Werdum. Like, that's just like a storyline that like I'm also like interested in. And then one of the other things too, it's not even like a particular fight, but one thing I'm just like, especially after all these Apex cards, we saw so many guys like get called up, and we saw so many guys make quick turnarounds that I wonder like what could happen like as like the Fight Island version, because like a lot of these guys are kind of going to be like there where they're not going to be able to pull like a lot of like prospects and stuff. So like are we going to see some guys fight twice? Maybe even like 3 times. Like, I recently talked to, I think it was Tim Elliott on Saturday, and like that was one thing he brought up. He's like, I almost see it as like an opportunity not just for like one fight, but like if you win, like, maybe you could get like another fight.
I don't know. Maybe. I mean, they're very stringent over there with how everything's going to go. So if that happened, that would just be absolutely wild. Like to see like Elliott fight one night and then fight on the 25th. Like that'd just be absolutely ridiculous. But I don't know. I think they're pretty steadfast on how everything's going to go. Like if you're fighting on this date, your charter leaves on this date, your ass better be on that charter. You know what I mean? There's just so much unsurety right now with COVID and things are starting to spike up again. So it's interesting to see like what they're going to do once they get back too. Cause we have the testing procedures before they go. We have the testing procedures once they're there, but nothing's in place for when they get back. And after you're traveling on a plane with a bunch of individuals who may have been surrounded and, with other people who have had it or, have symptoms of having it, that's what worries me the most. Like those types of scenarios, like getting back home. Like I don't know if the UFC may even implement this before all is said and done, but once they get back to Vegas, I wish there was like, they went right to the Apex and got tested again or something like that.
Sure. Well, I mean, that pretty much does it for the show. I mean, once again, thanks, Mike. I know you're a busy guy, so I appreciate you giving us the time. Anything before we let you go?
That's it, guys. You see my Twitter handle on the screen right there. What the Heck drops tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, MMA Fighting. We got John Annek, Combo Worthy, Maurice Green, and Julian Arosa coming on. I'm also going to be talking to Paul Felder tomorrow. That'll be its own separate thing. And then I got a lot of Fight Island interviews coming up for What the Heck next week. So lots of cool stuff going on. And thank you guys very much. You guys are grinding away. Respect the hustle from both of you and keep killing it, gentlemen. Thank you for bringing me on.
Thanks. And what about you, Lucas? Any final statements here?
Well, I'm not going to be able to beat, what the Grandsire with Lucas Grandsire. I mean, it just doesn't have the same appeal. But no, I got a few trickle of interviews coming up, grinding to get some stuff out there. So hopefully I'll have some good stuff to announce soon, content-wise.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, just make sure to follow us on social media too, Deep Water MMA Podcast, and our Twitter is MMA_deep. And then on Facebook, Instagram, it's Deep Water MMA Podcast. Pretty self-explanatory. And then you can follow me too. My personal Twitter is cnorthup732. And we'll be back next Wednesday. Thanks to Miami News. Thanks once again to Mike again for joining us, and also Eric for helping us out with this. And thanks, guys, and we'll see you next week.
Don't give Eric any shine. What are you, crazy?
We're not trying to get fired, Mike. We love Eric. we love working for him.
I have a little bone to pick with him because Mike said earlier that he interviewed Eric. We want to have Eric on the first episode, and he said no. Yeah. He said he had nothing to offer.
I was in his face, though. I was like, hey, you want to do an interview? And he wasn't going to be the jerk that said no to me. So, he was probably like, whoa, okay, I guess I'll do this thing. But it's crazy how, like, that little moment inspired, like, Eric's one of my best friends and one of my closest friends in the industry. And you guys can attest to this. One of the best overall guys that you will find in the sport. So, it all started some random ass weekend in Syracuse, New York.
So you're saying be more aggressive next time?
Yeah,
fly to his house and put a microphone in his face. I'll do an interview.
All right.
Send him a stream and be like, Eric, click on the damn link. But don't fire us, because we're a great team.
Send him a bottle of hot sauce, something he's never had before. He'll come on your show. There you go.
There it is.
All right, guys. Well, thank you guys for coming today, and we'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.